Good evening. I'm welcoming to the January program for ABC League of Women Voters. League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that is committed to education and to increasing participation of voters in all levels of government. We have our program tonight is about the impact of the pandemic on our students. And we have four speakers. One of them is me, unfortunately. Aaron Balzer is a school psychologist. You want to wave, Aaron? And in Anoka Hennepin. And he's going to provide us a broad perspective on the issues of how the pandemic has impacted the mental well-being of students. He's done a lot of work in preparation for this. So I will be speaking on behalf of a parent who is the parent of two children with disabilities. And I will I know I'm very familiar with her and the children, so I can speak to that. And Andrea Whitcomb will address the challenges and opportunities of being a music teacher in Anoka Hennepin during distance learning. And Sebastian Whitcomb, her son, is a junior, and he is going to talk with us about his experiences, the opportunities and challenges in distance learning. So, Aaron, do you want to start?
So are we going to see whether it was worth Sue hiring me 20 years ago or not? Or
Yes, it was. It was a good decision.
It was good to hear from you. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen and see if this all works. Okay. All right, everybody with me? Okay, great. Technology's working. How about that? So thank you, everybody. It's a privilege to speak with you all tonight. I appreciate the mission and positions that you take, and I'm so thankful for what you do. So in the last year, COVID and politics have provided us with many unique challenges, but also opportunities for growth. For kids, it's tempting to say it's a lost year, or they should all just repeat the last grades. You know, I'm sure that many of you have heard similar things from others. But I just want to pause that for a moment. So I was reading something from a superintendent in New York, and she recently shared some insights. She says, "What on earth are we trying to catch them up on? Resist the pressure from whomever the powers that be are, that they're in a hurry to fix kids or make up for lost time. We have to recognize that the time is not lost. It was invested in surviving an historic period of time in their lives, in our lives, all of our lives. The children do not need to be fixed." So I think if we approach it from a sense of normalcy, you know, the kids need to know that all of this that we're doing is normal. We're trying to get through it, okay? And I think for many of us who haven't experienced large events like this in our lives, we don't know that it's normal. We don't realize that it's normal. You know, we've had such stability that we forget that there are times of crisis sometimes. So we're just living in this time. It's reality. Kids are learning valuable lessons, and for the most, they just might be different ones. So adults need to just love and support them through what comes. The second important thing I'd like to say is that kids are just not little adults. The biggest thing for adults to be recognizing is that they are the adults and that they're in charge of the kids. And so I think sometimes we have to be careful about recognizing that. It's kind of a medieval notion that survived throughout the 20th century and still does in the pharmaceutical industry, that they just think that kids are just smaller. But we have to say, no, they're different and they're not mature. This is something I threw together at 3 o'clock after listening to something from NPR. And they were talking about the effect of difficult things in the news. I think this is pretty timely as considering what happened last week. So we have to be careful about how much we share with kids, and we have to see what questions they have. We have to ask them questions. What do they know? What have they found out? What do they want to know? How is their experience here? I know my kids saw some television last Wednesday and had a lot of questions about where we were at. And I'm thankful that my kids weren't 4 or 5. My youngest one is 9. So there's an understanding there. But thinking about the experiences that some of the people shared on that podcast, it was really interesting to see that when some of the people saw things like Kosovo happening in the news, they thought, well, is this happening? This is happening a mile away. They don't have any sense of the time and the place of where this is happening. So it's important to give that to them as well. Labeling. We have to be careful about labeling people as evil or bad. So there's a lot of bad things that have happened during all of this time, especially in the last year. And it's very tempting to let that bleed over to the kids. And we have to be careful about that. Instead, there's bad behaviors, and we have to instead look for helpers and uniters and people who are going to bring us through this. So encourage kids to tell their own version of the story. So this is through art, through their expression, through their play. They need to process things and make sure to give them the opportunity to do so. And lastly, if you feel powerless, take action. So this is a group that I'm preaching to the choir, okay? You're all volunteers. You're all people who are taking action, and you're speaking with your actions louder than the words. Okay, so that kind of comes up over and over as we do our work together. Okay. Sad thing. Children are not getting help a lot of the time. And part of it has to do with the stigma of mental health. Now, it's improving, but yet we can see there's a lot going on that's not being helped. There's a lot of kids who aren't getting help for lots of different reasons. For one, we're not particularly good at sharing or getting kids to share their emotions in healthy ways because the adults aren't doing it much of the time. So online with kids, it's even more difficult to find out a lot of times how they're feeling because the ones that are really struggling aren't logging on, or they have their cameras off, right? Or there's other things happening that are interfering with our ability to identify the children who are struggling. And it really is up to our ability to reach those families, in order to make a difference there. So we have to be persistent about that. In the past, and still in the future, or still in the present, people with mental health disorders have often been labeled as violent or dangerous. People are afraid to talk about it sometimes. They don't know, if I get help, what are people going to think about me, right? And it's generally pretty misunderstood by the public. So, for instance, stigmas of calling people lazy, or he's just naughty, or he's irritable, have been really, really things that are hard to break through sometimes. And it makes people avoid wanting to get help. So they self-stigmatize as well. So, and then thirdly, institutional stigma. So we intentionally or unintentionally limit funding for mental health research, or we don't give as much funding to mental health services as in many other health initiatives. And part of that is because a lot of times it's hidden, or again, it's called irritable, lazy. It's not recognized as for what it is. It's illness, and illnesses need help. So what's happening? Here's some early warning signs that kids might have a mental health disorder. We have to be the ones. We have to be the ones to recognize it. We have to be the ones to point it out. We have to be the ones to encourage people to get help. So these things are regularly shared with teachers and are part of relicensure, as I'm sure some of you are former teachers. And you know that. So we have to go beyond the things we see at the surface level, and we need to look for patterns. So persistent sadness. So what does that mean? It might just mean lack of work engagement, losing interest in things that the kid normally would have been interested in. So maybe the kid isn't logging on. Why, right? It can look like not logging on. It can look like not engaging in partner activities or reading activities. Our music teacher there probably has a lot of ideas about this too, that signs that she's seen that a kid is just disengaging online might look a lot differently than it did while a child was in the class. Threats and of suicide, threats of hurting themselves, scratching themselves, lots of things like this. It's hard to see right now. And a lot of things, we're not getting reports like we did when the kids were in the building because we're not the first best support for them many times right now. I think that's a big challenge of the pandemic, is that a lot of these issues are hidden from the school. So we do our best to get information out to communicate with us in many different ways, all the different crisis lines, all the different ways to communicate with the school. And when we do have threats, though, we do follow up with the child, with the caregiver, and we make a plan and assess risk. 5 and 6, outbursts. This is another thing that we're not seeing like we did. A lot of it, as Andrea can probably say, is just, again, disengagement. So when kids are full-time in the school, we see lots of behaviors, lots of signs that they're unhappy. And that's really hard to see. Even when we were in the hybrid learning model, in the fall, behavior referrals were way, way down. In fact, I talked to a social worker at one school who said, we usually have 3 behavioral referrals on the first day. We didn't have one until October 1st. So that is striking. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it, but one of the biggest ones is the very small class sizes. Half the kids, you can get to kids quicker. They aren't as stressed out. They're not as scared. They don't feel like they're left out in the cold so much because the teacher can respond to their needs much, much quicker. So I did see that teachers were reporting, sometimes they were getting through 2 days of material in one day, just because the kids were with them and they could be with the kid. I'm sure all of you have heard this, but it bears repeating. It takes one strong relationship at minimum for a lot of kids, especially kids who are at higher risk, in order to get through and to feel like they are a worthwhile person, that what they do and what they say matters. A lot of people can overcome very much if they have this in place. So any of the kids that we see, the highest risk kids we see, make sure you're making that connection. Okay, so you asked me for some little bit of data. So here we go. So there's some good things. It's not all bad. So overall, mental health stigma is decreasing. However, with certain segments of the population, mental health continues to be quite stigmatizing. We've come a long way since I was a kid, and that hasn't been too long. But I do remember even then, my grandmother told my family not to take me to the psychologist because I wasn't crazy. Don't tell me that's still not happening. There's a lot of that still happening. Kids are getting better at self-identifying. So there is common language. We talk about these things in the classroom, in the home environment. There's a lot more visibility. So kids can say, I'm sad, or I'm having trouble with this, and they might be able to use words that adults can recognize that will get them the help that they need. Telehealth, boy, in the last year, this has come a long ways. So just the ability for me to talk to your group like this, I probably couldn't have done this a year ago because I wouldn't have known what to do. But now pretty much everybody all at once has been forced to grasp the technology that's being required to get all kinds of different helps. So we're seeing, we have mental health therapists in the schools that are contracted from Lee Carlson or Headway or different organizations, and they were able to keep their connection with kids remotely. And it's been a godsend. I mean, this isn't what I went to school for. This isn't what I wanted to do, but it's sure a lot better than doing nothing. So we have to recognize the benefits that telehealth brings. again, behaviors are way down in the schools while they're there. And student engagement has been way up. Maybe Andrea will disagree with me. Here's the bad news. Right now, kids are showing us greater anxiety in 2020 than in the 1950s child psychiatry patients, people that were hospitalized. So that is striking. It's very sad. All that we know about anxiety, and yet it continues to rise. So I think that really just bears to mind that maybe there's more stress in some ways, and we really haven't kept pace with treating it. We haven't kept pace with helping kids understand what to do about it. About 3/4 of psychologists in the last year saw anxiety treatment demand go way up. In fact, so much that 40% of them are reporting feeling very burned out. I think that's probably very similar across the healthcare system. Anxious, depressive, sleep symptoms all up in the last year. So this all kind of boils down to social isolation. And that's my personal opinion, but there's also research to bear that out. Social isolation, the results of that can show up to 9 years later. So people have significantly larger measurable depression 9 years later after a significant social isolation event. So that says connectedness. Connectedness is really what keeps us insulated from poor mental health. And this pandemic sure has not helped. It's not helped kids in that way. There's another study that was done that talked about distrust in our society correlates highly with anxiety. And this, it was in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and the researchers stated that until people feel both safe and connected to others, anxiety is likely to remain high. So that works at the micro level, in your homes, in your classrooms, in your communities, right? And as our nation. So when politicians talk about the importance of healing the wounds, right? Of coming together, of passing bipartisan bills, hey, that's what makes people feel safe. And anxiety does come down. There's real measurable results of that. And lastly, economic downturn. So the Great Recession, we all know something about that. We probably all experienced that. Maybe some of you didn't retire until later because of that. So just a 5% increase in national unemployment correlated with a 35 to 50% increase in clinically meaningful childhood mental health problems. So if you want quantifiable evidence, that's something. And now here, 10, 12 years later, the same researcher is reporting the same preliminary results, having to do with COVID-19. So there will be impacts of this for some time. Okay, it can't be all about other people, can it? So these people were once in my family. In the not so distant past, addressing mental health issues was more about exorcising demons. And as we gained a limited understanding, it became more about pitying people, right? And protecting others from these dangerous individuals. So this is Mary, my second great grandmother, and she had 9 children in Clay County near Moorhead. Her husband, John, did odd jobs and worked for the railroad. And eventually, at one point, the state took away the children because they could no longer afford to provide them shoes. And instead, they were using flour sacks to go to school in the winter. So Mary had virtually nothing, and then she lost her children. So due to this breaking point and with no help available to her, Mary spent the rest of her life in St. Peter at the mental health ward. So this is a picture of her late in life. I'm still very close with her daughter, my Aunt Ellen, who's about 100 years old. Well, exactly 100 years old. And she still speaks of how her mother was never able to get help, to get well. And today she very well may have. She didn't even know what was going on with the world around her. She was probably so medicated. But it's no wonder she ended up there. As she reached her breaking point, she had very few resources and very little hope for the future. very little support. So today we have lots of tools to manage mental illness, yet there's still many inequities about who gets it, who gets help, and when and how. So here's an image from the CDC that talks about adverse childhood experiences. And I don't know how many of you have seen presentations on this in the past, but basically it talks about what happens to a kid affects them throughout their life. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I think what is a surprise is how much it impacts a person throughout their lifetime. So again, Mary had 9 kids, and many of whom went on to very, very tough lives. And thankfully, my Aunt Ellen was spared from a lot of that because she was adopted by her oldest sister. She kind of escaped. But in the home, the kids suffered from unintentional neglect, malnourishment, undiagnosed mental illness of a parent, and a largely absent father, among many other things, I'm sure. These, again, are called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. During our pandemic that we're dealing with today, there are a lot more stressors on families, economic and otherwise. And what's really concerning to me is there's a great opportunity for these stressors to go unnoticed or unreported over time. So it's been, almost a year now. And a lot of times, like I said, it's difficult that's one of the biggest challenges the school is dealing with, is how do we recognize that? And I'm sure that the state health department is in a similar position. Social workers, in the counties are dealing with this as well. Caseloads of county caseworkers, for instance, are just out of control. So anyway, getting back, neglect, abuse, mental illness in the household, separation of parents, these are all ACEs. And when too much stress is on the system for too long of a period of time, it overwhelms the system. And it leads to all of these lifetime outcomes. They have more divorce, they have more disease, they get cancer, they die earlier from all different sorts of issues. And I think that everybody in this room can probably speak to examples of people who went through a lot, and though they've survived it, they have kind of permanent results of those kinds of situations. The toughest thing is that the impact of ACEs is not linear. It's got a multiplier effect. So if you have 1, it's something. If you have 2, it's 2 times 2. If you have 4, it's 4 times 4. So in fact, an impact on relationships, behavior, and overall health is striking. So we need to be careful, and we need to, as these kids return to school, we need to continually assess. We need to work to get people the help they need quickly. Okay, so now that I've bummed you all out, it's easy to get bogged down by the negative data trends. And actually, I don't spend a lot of time, obsessing about that or thinking about that, because it just bums you out. So we know that hope and gratitude are also contagious, though. It's not just the bad stuff. So instead of getting caught up in all that, we have to ourselves lead instead. I'm sure many of you recognize the pyramid here. It's a pyramid of basic needs described by famous psychologist Abraham Maslow, who talks about you can't be really that great to other people if you don't have enough to eat, right? If you're cold at night, you're probably going to be kind of irritable, right? If you don't feel safe, right, you're probably not going to have very many good friends, because you're not going to be able to treat them the way they need to be treated, right? So it's important that what we do as adults is we provide what we can when we can, so that children have a chance then to help and serve others in the future. I'd like to look at this in 3 basic concepts. And I know caregivers get the brunt of everything to do with children. There's no doubt about it. Every night they go home to their mom and their dad, or their grandparents, or their caregiver or foster mother or parent. So it's in their hands, right? But as I looked at this and thought about I wanted to list out what are all the responsibilities for caregivers? What are all the responsibilities for staff? It's very similar things. It's very similar things. It's just maybe just a little different for staff. So let's look at availability, consistency, and flexibility. How do adults respond to the responsibility? So, ever been to Interstate Park? I highly recommend it. So you got to be available to kids. Actions, again, speak louder than words. Okay, it meets their safety and love needs so that they can then, reach out and be good to other people. They know if they know they're valued, they have self-worth, then they can be confident and have the thought that, yes, I'm worth something and I can make a difference with somebody else. Okay, so this is, again, highly on caregivers to provide these things throughout the week and throughout the year. Okay, as professionals, we also have to make time. And some kids, 10% of the kids take up 90% of the time in the classroom, right? And I think that's, again, why so many kids did better this fall in hybrid. But professionals need to provide what the kids need, of course, but we also have to recognize we have boundaries, and we can't get too caught up, because if we get too caught up, we can't help the other kids that need you as well. Be consistent. How many times have you heard that in your life? Say what you do and do what you say. So kids have to see predictability in what adults do. So if the kid knows how the adult is going to act, they're way more likely to know how to act themselves. We have to be active in our discussion of rules with kids. We have to let them speak up if they disagree and talk it out. We have to establish limits, reasonable limits that make sense on technology. A lot of parents, I find that in kids that I work with, and I don't want to call anybody out, but a lot of kids are playing Call of Duty at age 5, which is a game that's a first-person shooter game, and they're killing everybody in Nazi Germany or wherever else. So this is not appropriate. This is not appropriate for any child, probably under 18, but certainly not someone younger than 13, 14 years old. But I routinely see this. And a lot of times they're the most vulnerable kids you can imagine. So where are they getting their modeling? Where are they getting this? There's mirror neurons in your brain that you're practicing what you see, right? And if you're doing it on the screen, you're doing it in your head. So there shouldn't be any wonder that kids are acting out violently in response to some of the things that they're seeing. We have to have developmental sensitivity in our conversations with kids as well. So when we're talking about the news, be careful not to overwhelm their sensitive brains and their ability to understand. And then lastly, of course, encouraging pro-social behavior, like not taking too long when you're speaking with the League of Women Voters. Flexibility. We have to, as much as I say to be consistent, we also have to be flexible, right? We have to adapt the rules and expectations to the situation. There are times when the rules don't apply. They just don't, you know that. And there's also times when the rules are dumb, right? And sometimes I need to admit that I made a stupid rule, okay? So sometimes I really have made a mistake, right? Like the night before Thanksgiving, I remember putting my son to bed and yelling at him because he didn't go to bed and he didn't go to bed and he didn't go to bed, right? You know, everybody has their limits. But after I got done yelling at him, I realized he had a cold cloth on his head and there was a wastebasket next to the bed. Whoops. So, you know, then you do an about face. You walk out, you take a couple breaths and you get together what you think you need to say and you go back and you apologize, right? So this applies not just to kid relationships, but marriages and other relationships you have too. You've got to admit what you did and then get back to it. You'll gain respect, not lose it. You have to be the safe place to talk, right? And if you can be the safe place to talk about one thing, when they're 13, they probably won't talk to you when they're 13. But by the time they're 15, maybe they'll start saying, oh yeah, maybe I can talk to him. Okay. So collaborative problem solving. one of my favorite things to do. Take in what the kid has to say. Make sure that you understand what they're saying and ask, is there anything else? And once you're sure that they get it, or once you're sure that you get it, then it's okay to share what the adult is concerned about and then try to see if you can make that all work out together. Okay, so if you become that safe place, then problems are going to be solved much more routinely and without nearly as much fuss. Okay, here's where you guys come in. If you're not the parent, right? If you're not the grandparent, what do we do? What do we all do? So we have to be aware and educate, all right? Be on the lookout for this in the community when you see somebody who's not acting very well, not acting very nice. Okay, you might not have a very good conversation with that person, but you got to call them out. You got to call them out. When you see the isms coming out, when you see sexism, racism, ageism, all those biases that we see day to day, and you might feel like you're the only person in the room who wants to say something, but you're probably not. There'll be people that appreciate you speaking out for them, those that are too afraid to say something. Okay, again, preaching to the choir, donations and volunteering. Yeah, you guys know all about those kinds of things. Many gifts, right? And persistence. If not you, who, right? So don't give up when your first efforts at calling someone out or your first efforts on making a difference with something isn't fruitful. Maybe there's just a different way to intervene or a different thing you can say, all right? The school system itself. So these are generally, off the top of my head, and probably after a while thinking about it, these are what the school have to provide. Maybe Sue has a lot of other ideas about this as well, because she was obviously in the position where she had to be doing this. But first we have to advocate at the state, legislative laws and resources. And Sue was tireless at this. You did a great job. Thank you, Sue. Challenges, though, during this time have been engagement with families, difficulty identifying needs, like I've said before. So we have to continue to try to figure out how can we identify the kids who need help, right? We need to continue to build out systems of support that aren't there. We need to continually evaluate how those things are going, if they're being used. And we need to advertise. So one great example that came up in the last year was putting crisis numbers on the back of student IDs. How easy is that? Very, very easy. There's a lot of other harder things, but for instance, we finally have, if somebody's familiar with the term focus rooms, if we have basically de-escalation rooms strategically invested for the next 2 years, where kids can basically de-escalate the behavior, right? Cool down. They can have a conversation with the adult about what happened. They can perform restitution or whatever it is, right? To kind of figure out what needs to happen now and then return to the learning environment, okay? So this is the way real life works anyway, right? You don't get to come to work if you're not going to behave yourself. So that's a part of it. All right, we're getting close, getting close. This is basically the pyramid of support, what the schools use to basically guide their decision making. And at number one is, what can Andrea Whitcomb do in the classroom to manage this behavior, right? And manage these outcomes. These are all the things that teachers know, their first and best strategies, right? And when there's too much going on, or it's beyond her control, or the student isn't learning enough, then we talk about targeted services, supplemental services, formalized interventions. So that's maybe where they consult with me or the social worker in the school, right? And then we start tracking the data to make sure that the kid is moving ahead. And if they're not, that's a conversation with the family and with the educational team about, do we need to move on to maybe a special education assessment, or what other resources are we not employing that need to go into this kid? So there is a system, and the system has partially worked this year, but this is another area where the pandemic has really held us back. Because how does a school follow through with behavioral interventions when they're with their mom or their dad all day, right? So it really has slowed down the referral process for kids who were struggling, last year, and we just aren't able to observe the behaviors that we need to in order to prove what we already know a lot of times. So, of course, this works for academics, not just for behaviors as well. All right, I'm seeing yawns. It's time to be done, isn't it? Okay, so what is working? Support staff are engaged. We are reaching out to families. Any information that we get, we try to make sure that we get to the end of the conversation, not just have the beginning of the conversation. Telehealth, the district is providing information in many different ways and many different forums to make sure that people have the data that they need to make decisions. Okay, crisis resources for families and staff as well. Some staff are using virtual classrooms, which is kind of neat. So, especially social workers, they've got their own social work website where they can click on different calming strategies, lots of different things that they would have learned in person, but they could practice them on their own, which is kind of neat. Virtual calming room. Osseo School District came up with this, and so you can click on different resources to see the aquarium with fish or listen to relaxing music or whatever it is. So there's a lot of cool, neat resources being developed right now. This is just a little bit more. Director of Mental Health Services is providing events across the community, and we've hired a full-time chemical health specialist as well. And then, and the Hazleton Betty Ford Clinic, we have a partnership with them starting now to deal with kind of more of the serious mental health / chemical issues that they're so good at working on. Okay, so I'll leave you with this before I move to questions. This is one of my favorite mentors. DeWitt Jones is a National Geographic photographer, and I'm sure that some of you have seen his work if you didn't know it was his. But his focus is always on what do we see right instead of focusing on what's wrong, right? There's beauty in everything, and you have to look at it the right way and you'll see it. And when you see it, you're not gonna be so tired out by it, right? So it's not so much just a conjuring exercise when you're working with kids and families. It's more about channeling the energy you do have so that you can get through it. All right. Okay. Enough of that.
So if there are questions, would you like to write them in the chat room and let me know, and then I'll read them to Aaron so that the audience can also hear them?
For sure. There's a lot of information in a short period of time. And
go ahead, and then we'll have our discussion at the end.
Okay. Right. Andrea, would you like to talk now and tell us what it is to be an art teacher during the pandemic?
I can. I hadn't planned quite as much as Aaron. Sounds
well,
like
didn't expect
a lot of work into it.
Yeah. So yeah.
I thought it would be just nice to talk kind of anecdotally about just teaching our littles at this time. I would echo a lot of what Aaron is saying, that a lot of what we're seeing is the checking out for students. And I can echo that as well as a parent, because I have a middle schooler and then also Sebastian. And we talk a lot about motivation. And what is your motivation, right? What is your motivation to do school? And the motivation is, I don't want to get in trouble. You're going to yell at me if I don't wake up on time and get my work done. But I think seriously about what is the student motivation when you're 5 years old or 8 years old or 10 years old or 16 years old, or even as adults, what is our motivation for for doing the things that we do. And a lot of it is because we have that self-awareness, right? Whereas these younger kids don't. And they're missing out on a lot when they don't show up. And so that fear of not being able to connect with them and continue those relationships. I mean, I teach K-5 general music, and so I have every student in this school, and I have them for 6 years if they were there in kindergarten through 5th grade. That is a long time to develop a relationship with a child. I am that consistency. They know from day one when they walk into school, there's Mrs. Whitcomb at her door, right? I'm not going anywhere, and they know that. So Aaron, I really appreciated that sort of 3 triangle, that consistency, flexibility, and availability. And that is truly what we all do. But the consistency at this point feels a little bit like it's being taken away from us as teachers, because we're having to put it on the children and the families to get them logged in, to get them connected with us. We can put it out there. Every week I put my work out there. I put my heart and soul into these lessons, and I make it as personal as I can, and try to give them something to look forward to, but that's all I can do. So letting go of me being the one offering the consistency, offering that reliability, that availability, is really hard as a teacher, and makes me sad every day when there's those handful of students that I once again don't see. And I know that as a general classroom teacher, they probably have a little bit more participation than as a specialist. Last spring, when we went into emergency education mode, when everything shut down, specialists sort of became a bit of an optional class structure because everybody was just in crisis at that moment. So right away, even that designation as a specialist was sad, because again, that relationship with those kids was so important to helping support their mental health, staying connected with them, over longer periods of time, and being available. And we've definitely done some positive work in that, where we're getting students to understand that these art areas, phy-ed, explorations, those specialist classes are required classes, and if anything, sometimes more important for their development at this point as well, because this is where we are dealing with like that human to human interaction. Everything we do in music has to do with being human and connecting with one another and expressing ourselves. So there are some vast holes right now, I think, in their education, because they just, for some reason, aren't accessing it consistently and we know there are so many reasons why families can't, why students can't. We can't even count on one hand the reasons why our students are not able to get logged in, access consistently, turning in work and communicating with families. And that, letting that part go. And Aaron, I see you kind of looking too, like it's just really hard because we're missing out on all of those opportunities that we normally would have, like being that first line of defense and seeing that child walk in the door and go, ooh, something happened. I can tell by the look on your face, and being able to say, hey, you want to talk? And that's heartbreaking, because relationship is central to what we do. To me, the academic part comes second. It's secondary, and it always has been, because that child that's in front of me is the most important part. So I think that that's one of the largest struggles. And it definitely is disproportionate to at least what I'm seeing in my school, specifically at Lincoln. So the demographics are a little bit different than like some of the more northern schools like Andover or Brookside or Sunrise. But a lot of our EL population tends to be the first ones to check out from some of these specials areas. We have a lot of our like lower socioeconomic families, people who are in crisis, McKinney-Vento families that are homeless. It's just not a priority. And, the hierarchy, the Maslow's hierarchy of your basic needs, they're not being met. And so we are definitely not a top priority at that point. But then, Aaron, like you said, there's that flip side too, that there are students who are thriving, and there are families who have come together and they've put aside, not forgotten, but put aside the really difficult parts of this, and they've chosen to concentrate on the silver lining. And I will say that I was one of them in the spring when the trees started budding. And I was so upset and sad about all of these opportunities that were missed and all of these people who were getting sick and dying in the world. And I took a second to just look out the window and feel grateful for the time to stop, the time to reconnect with my family after running for, years and years to Boy Scouts and play practice and band practice and, union meetings and whatever else I was doing. There was nothing. Yeah, Sebastian's laughing because he knows. I mean, he's the reason that we were running all over. Luckily, he got his driver's license last month. So yay for us. but that ability to connect as a family and to really get in touch with kind of what's been going on with my children was a silver lining for me. But we have the resources to do it in my house, right? As a teacher working from home, I'm here. As an educated individual, I understand how the system works, right? Because of my background. I have a husband who's self-employed, and so he's able to build some flexibility into his schedule. So we are very lucky, but we know that we don't represent everybody. We know that we don't represent a lot of our population of students. But it's trying to, Erin finding that silver lining and taking that second, that has been sort of the juxtaposition of all the pain and stress and anxiety and true sadness at missing out on all of the things that we know we want to be a part of in our students' lives during this time. So. But yeah, I don't know if anybody has questions or if there are any specific topics you'd like me to speak to. Susan, if you're talking, you're still muted.
Yeah, put them on the chat. And Erin, we have some questions for you, and I saw you answered a couple, but because we have a cable TV audience, we also need to go back. Sebastian, would you mind if I spoke for a few minutes and then had you come on last?
Yeah, that
All
works.
right. Okay, I am speaking on behalf of a parent, unless she wishes to speak for herself. She's here, but she'll click on if she wants to. Her name is Amanda Friedrich. She has two children. Her 7-year-old has a diagnosis that is challenging to the school and to her because it's new to us. In fact, he has two diagnoses. One is mast cell activation syndrome. Ever heard of that, Erin Balzer? Yeah, I hadn't either. It's a whole learning opportunity. Amanda's laughing. A mast cell activation disorder it results in inflammation. It's like an allergic reaction that can happen pretty much at any time to anything, and then not happen again with that same substance or food or air for a while, and then cause possibly even where you need a shot. I can't remember, just that word just left me, Amanda. Anyway, yes, anaphylactic shock. So it's a severe acute disorder that in Vincent's case has also resulted in something called pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder, or PANDAS. And that is basically where some of that swelling from the mast cell activation syndrome has resulted in swelling and inflammation in the brain. So there are a legion of behaviors and problems and changing things every day. It's hard to know what to anticipate. This little guy is not responding well to the treatment right now, so they're back to kind of looking at what's going to happen. Treatment isn't clear, but as you can imagine, having a child like this on distance learning has had incredible challenges. So some days when he has been invited to participate, he has totally shut down. Sometimes he's exploded. He's had lots and lots of behaviors. So for Vincent, this distance learning, and I'm sure that he's not the only child in the district, but he's one example that this has been a profound disadvantage, because he's just he's not able. In school, he had been doing relatively well. I don't know if that would continue to be the case. I don't think any of us know right now. But his ability to participate is very limited to non-existent. So that's one side. He is one child, I think, of probably many children whose ability to, based on the basis of their disability, cannot benefit from distance learning. They need to have that teacher there, you know, and they need to have that presence, and they need to have going to some place where that's the job. Because at first, when Amanda tried to be the teacher, she was not the teacher. And that was pretty clear that that was not okay. He wasn't doing school at home, because this was not school. So that was a challenge in and of itself. And then things have gotten probably notably worse since those days. The other child is a younger child. He's in kindergarten, excuse me. So sorry. Anyway, he is 5, and he's a kindergartner, and he's really, I think, rocking this distance learning. He does well in school when he is there, but he also does well on distance learning. Do you agree, Amanda? He signs in and he does his work. He's independent. He can do what he needs to do, and he enjoys learning. So I think as we have experienced this pandemic, which has had some silver linings, and I think, Andrea, I thank you for bringing that up. There are silver linings here, but there are also a lot of nightmares. And I think that the kids in Anoka Hennepin and every other district in this country have experienced that continuum, that broad continuum of strong success to dismal failure. And it's not anyone's fault. I mean, it's not the school district's fault for failure to do something. It's simply the situation. But it does mean that everyone is going to be put to a task and a harder challenge as things kind of come back to normal. My son is a teacher. He works with Aaron, and he must also know Andrea, because you guys were at a meeting tonight. And he just said that he anticipates that kids are going to struggle coming back behaviorally, because now they're going to have expectations placed on them. And so, you know, I think that they'll also, though, for a lot of them, just benefit from having other kids around. And that there will be some kids who will struggle having expectations, and there will be other kids who are going, thank God that there is somebody else here besides my mom and dad and brother or sister. So that's how I think that plays. But I think that there are some unique challenges that are with the district, and we will have Sebastian talk, and then I'm going to go back and read all these questions. Okay, Sebastian, do you want to tell us what this has been like for you?
I want to just say one thing on top of that too, because he does have a little brother, and the little guy does have a diagnosis as well. And so the experiences that the two of them have had are very different. And we have definitely seen a lot of those things that Aaron talked about manifest in the younger one, more so because he's 12. And so he's still, you know, in the throes of puberty and figuring out life and everything. But we do see it. And as a family, it's very difficult to watch that and to work with him, to support him, but then also give him the flexibility to do the things like that Aaron talked about, which is, you know, take that time and process through. Because if he was at school, he would be able to process through as somebody. And so as a parent, it's almost like you have to don a different hat every 30 minutes, because now I'm the teacher, now I'm the psychologist, now I'm, you know, the chef now. So I definitely empathize with you, Amanda, and all of our families who, you know, find things that they struggle with on a daily basis. So, all right, Sebastian.
Okay. Well, hi. I didn't prepare like anything, so I've really got nothing to go off of, so I'm just gonna
Just wing it. Just wing it. You're good.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I'm in my junior year of high school, which is a pretty big year because, as you know, it's the year you start actually looking for colleges and, you know, where you want to go and everything. And all of your grades are starting to really matter because they're going to be looked at by every college you try to go to. And then, you know, if you're screwing up and everything, there's just a whole lot of stuff going on in this one year. And to have this kind of thing happen, this whole COVID thing happen on a year like this, I feel like is definitely holding a lot of people back. Like, not just me, but because there's obviously way more other stuff that's happening to, like, yeah, my younger brother or other people, especially with like mental health disorders and all that. But just even with like students who usually do well in school and haven't had any of these issues, they're developing and they're showing up in these students, which it's never happened before. And it's something that I feel both parents and the students don't know how to deal with, which means that they're not going to get the help they need. They're not going to get any support. And that's not good, because everyone needs support in one way or another. I mean, personally for me, like I've definitely had a lot of trouble with being motivated, as Mom said, where I don't really have a reason to be doing all of the stuff that I'm being told to do. There's no one there to like actually tell me to do things. I'm not as focused as I would be in the classroom because there's so many other distractions in our house that I wouldn't have in a normal classroom. I'm not surrounded by all the other students, so I'm not feeling immersed in the school experience that I'm used to, which I know can definitely be hard for a lot of people, me included. It's definitely been a challenge because I'm a social person, and I like to talk with my friends and, you know, bounce ideas off other students and collaborate on projects. And it's been really difficult because there's no way for us to communicate besides like through text and phone calls, which are nowhere near face to face, which is what everyone's used to, especially with like if we have like group projects in school, which we had at the beginning of this year, but that was still hybrid, but it still was weird because trying to get everybody to meet on a Google Doc and a Google Meet at the same time when we all had free time, which was at like 9:30 at night, to try and hammer out this project that's due the next day, that we just got this earlier this week because the teachers have been trying to figure out how to run all this stuff anyways because it's their first time doing it. It's definitely a lot harder than it would be, and you don't have the support of the teachers being there to actually like show you how to do it. They just kind of give you a set of instructions and say, here, read this and do it, and that's the best that they can really offer. And it's not their fault. It's just the situation we're all stuck in, and that's definitely not easy. Also, as a student who's really into music, and I've been in band and choir for a long time now, and having this year not being able to actually like physically play my instrument in the ensemble setting that I really, really like, and not being able to have that, you know, the conductor's up there on the stand and everyone's just, you can hear the sound coming. It's awesome, but I can't do that now. And that is really hard for someone who really thrives in the musical environment. And that's the same with every other band student I know, every other orchestra student I know, every choir student. You're not in that big group setting that everyone really thrives from. I even our conductor, my conductor, Mr. Hauser, he has definitely had trouble coming up with even just stuff for us to do, because like he posts music on our Google Classroom, and we have to read through it, but no one has their microphones turned on. You can't hear anyone else, and he's basically sitting alone in the band room playing a trumpet while we're all following along. And it's definitely been hard for him, even because besides that, there's nothing else we can really do. That was what band class was the whole ensemble practicing these songs and just being together. And now he's just grabbing at air trying to figure out what we could fill the time with. It's definitely not a good time for anyone who is used to that or enjoys that experience. My mom
Thank
just
you. Thank you, Sebastian. I think that we're going to go back to questions now, if that's okay. We have quite a few questions on mental health. So let's see. Well, Deanne asks, what have you learned during this time that will carry over into when kids are back in school? Are there things that would maybe be a silver lining? And maybe Andrea, you or Aaron could address that.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Well, I think, I don't think that online learning is going away. If you had seen, Anoka Hennepin is planning on offering online school next fall for K-12. So I think the technological pieces that we've all been thrown into, forced into, inundated with, I think that will last well beyond this pandemic. And I also think that the confidence that's being built in the world of technology for adults and then for students as well, hopefully will carry on. And as technology improves and changes, maybe we won't be so afraid to jump in and try it. And utilize it in a way that's meaningful for our students. I feel like I've heard that a lot from my colleagues. I also think that we are going to process our relationships with each other differently as we move forward, not only as a school community, but communities at large. So it's really a study in humanities, I think, and it is going to be a good 10 years before we really have a chance to sit down and look back and see how we are going to change as humans, I think, throughout this.
I guess I can pipe in and add something to
you have anything to add on?
Oh, sorry. I'd like to add a little bit as far as the online learning. I do hope that good protocols are put in place for participation in that program, because with a lot of the students that we see this year, we couldn't go on like that. It's just not feasible. They're not making progress. So I would say that it is a really poor experiment for a lot of the students, especially the younger ones. And I'm concerned that some people will enroll them in the online learning and they aren't going to get anywhere and we won't have much recourse.
Well, and I wonder if there will be a better checks and balances system in place for that, similar to like families that homeschool, where they do have, testing and things that they do need to report to the state. So you're right, Aaron, though, that we definitely need to keep an eye on how it rolls out and the efficacy of being able to offer that. But then it also offers that flexibility for those families whose students, maybe due to health reasons. I know I have a colleague whose high schooler several years ago was dealing with some major health concerns, and he missed so much school. And it was like pulling teeth to get support for him. So this might just be another avenue, hopefully, to, level the playing field, so to say, for some of those families who need this option, and it will be free for them, and as it should be, free public education. But as teachers, it will be interesting as well to see how that gets handled as to who teaches these classes and how is that figured out, and how are the assignments equitable or inequitable to in-person teaching. So a lot to figure out there for sure.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question for Aaron. 79% of youngsters have not received services for mental health. About how many these days are needing services?
Well, I'm not going to answer with a specific number. That wouldn't be something I could look at right this minute. But what I can say is that over the 20 years that I've been around here, we have seen a steady increase in the services needed and the services offered. There was a fear, I think, by district admin in the past of, if you build it, they will come. I think Sue probably remembers hearing that.
I tried to build it, yeah.
But what we found out is, by continuing to try to hold back the water, so to speak, is the waters just get higher and higher behind the wall, right? And eventually the levee breaks, right? So it isn't, by keeping them out, we weren't preventing anything, right? What we were doing is creating a backlog of unmet mental health needs.
It was just really a response. Whose responsibility is it to fund? And schools can only take on so much. And so if schools had begun to fund mental health needs, that would have come at a cost to K-12 education. And that was a big danger. And now I think it's done through the grants with school-based mental health, which is a super positive program.
It is a super positive program.
And when I left,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just encouraging you.
Okay. When I left Anoka Hennepin and when I retired in 2008, the Center for Disease Control, CDC and NAMI was estimating about 20% of all individuals had mental health needs. And we were not hitting anywhere close to that at that time. And I don't know if that number has increased. I haven't kept pace with that. So, but then of that 20%, 79% of them are not getting service. So those are numbers that I think you can begin to get a feeling for the scope of the problem that remains. Mm-hmm. So Aaron, Wes asks, how connected are the schools to the county public health department? They do a lot of 5-year planning. Do you think they are looking at those future implications of isolation and the mental health stressors you described on families and neighborhoods?
Wes, I think that's an excellent question. And obviously, with my position in the district, I'm not typically at the systems level. However, I think this is something, for me to have good conversations with district admin about, and I am in a position to do that. So I think that it's important that we do think about this, at the different levels, and we do appropriate planning, because yes, there is going to be, and it continue to be, increased needs for mental health supports. I think my biggest complaint the last few years hasn't been we don't have anybody to do the work. I think the biggest concern I've had is we're not paying them enough to stay. And this grant that Sue mentions, it was from the legislature, it was passed by the legislature, and basically it only pays for entry-level people to do mental health work with kids. And I find that they work for about 3 years, and then they leave and find something, that they can actually grow a family with, because they don't get raises that are commensurate with the work and experience that they have. So I think the grant is great, but we need to compensate people, appropriately if we want to have individuals stay with us.
I wasn't aware of that, of the funding. I'll have to talk with Rob. So Amanda, you are on the Anoka County Interagency Council, right?
The ACCFC, Anoka Child Family Council.
Yep. So is this question about the longer term, the implications of the isolation and the mental health stressors, is that a topic that has been discussed at that?
It hasn't actually, because the last meeting that we had, the gal, drawing a blank on her name right now, Sue, you know what we've talked. She was not able to attend, and so any of her updates and information was not given.
Okay,
But I know that was a concern, and it was brought up, and I'm wondering if it's at the next meeting that we'll learn more about that actually.
okay, thank you. Let's see, I'll scroll down. Have schools considered focusing more on the mental wellness than on academics?
Well, I think you know that the answer is they'll always focus more on academics as they see that as their core mission. However, I think what we are finding is kind of the pendulum swinging back towards the idea of teaching the whole child. When we've adopted certain curriculums over the years, you know, even things like science and social studies and music and all the different things that kids should be learning have kind of been pushed to the very edges of what we can do. And it's been, well, just give them another reading group, giving another math group, give another reading group, you know, because they really want those scores in those core areas to be up. But what they're missing is that the integrated brain functioning, basically, and I'm sure Andrea has a lot to say about that, you know, is a lot to do with, you know, being sure that the kid is well-rounded. And if you don't teach teachers how to promote mental health in their classroom and you don't give them the time to teach it, right, then we're just going to have a kid who is starving, essentially, starving for learning how to be a whole human being, character education, they used to call it. Well, you know, character education is throughout the day. You know, many ways, but we've got such a well-oiled machine of moving from one reading group to the next that we forget about the transitional times, and we forget about the time that's needed to say, how do you go to the bathroom without, you know, getting yelled at? You know, and sometimes it's as simple things as that, right? You know, each staff member needs to have the time to go out to that bathroom and give them a little ticket that says, hey, you know, you're doing exactly what you should be doing.
I would agree with Aaron that we definitely are seeing the pendulum swing. And I would say even the last couple of years, just in my school alone, we've had several book studies and really deep conversations about what the most important things are with the students. And we do keep coming back to relationship over and over. And so, you know, those pieces, Aaron, that you speak to, have to be centralized in it, because without significant relationships, there is no significant learning. That's what we hear over and over again. So we've actually been given permission, I'm going to put it in quotes because of course we don't need permission, but permission to take some flexible time throughout the day to have those morning meetings, to build in some of those transitional relationship things, you know, even just the, you know, get up and do a little movement or play a name game, something that will help students kind of solidify their identity, or even show and tell, something as basic as show and tell. Kids learn through play, right? They learn through play and interaction, and a lot of that kind of has gone back, especially for those kindergartners. You know, it's like we need to read, we need to do math, but we're starting to see even the curriculum come around a little bit and incorporate more of that play. Play is how children learn. That's how they develop. It's developmentally appropriate. So as arts teachers, we play, but play is learning. And so it looks like all we're doing is having fun, but what we're really doing is, like you said, reaching in and developing, you know, the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and we're getting those synapses flying, and we're making cross-curricular connections constantly. And, you know, I'm doing cross body in order to solidify that quarter note or whatever it happens to be, because it's all encompassing to developing that whole child for sure.
Great, that is great. So we have another question. Self-stigma, is that a learned characteristic reflecting the community in which the child exists?
Wow, what a fantastic question that is. I love it. So I would say it starts with what I as a dad is saying and saying about myself, right? How do I get through a problem? Do I swear up a storm and throw a tool, or do I say, okay, I got part of the way. Now let me look on YouTube to see how I can finish it. You know, it's not about, there isn't an end, there isn't a right and a wrong, there is a yes and, right? So yes, we got part of it. Here's the next step. And teachers are constantly trying to, you know, feed the next step and then expecting the student to go along. And I think Andrea's son is saying, a lot of times we're expecting them to do the next 5 steps and then come back. And sometimes that can be difficult, especially for kids, right, who don't have the level of executive functioning, the level of organization and sequential business in their brain to be able to handle that. So I think distance learning is tough for some of those kids. Self-stigma, I'm getting off track. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, we as a society are, you know, we'll say if somebody makes a mistake, they're out, they're done, they're wrong, get them out of here. We don't want to hear from them ever again. Okay, there's no such thing as a hero or a villain, right? It's we have behaviors that lead us higher or lower, right? We can't just outright reject somebody for making a mistake. And I think until we fix that, right, and we have leaders that are showing us that we can recover from things that we've done, right, then that's going to remain.
Okay, thank you. That was, okay. What strains are impacting the capacity of the teachers and staff in the building?
Boy, we've been talking about this for months and months and months. What isn't a drain and a strain right now? I think you could probably all come up with a handful of things that you assume are draining and straining teachers, and you'd probably be right. I think the stress of the unknown, that is a big one. We just don't know. We are typically very type A people as teachers. We are planners, we are organizers, right? And we can't plan or organize right now. We're concerned about the health and safety of our students, of our colleagues, of our families, of our communities, of ourselves, of the nation. We are concerned that we're failing. We're concerned that we're not meeting the needs of the people that we serve, which are our students, our families, and our communities. We have very high expectations for ourselves. I mean, I just had a meeting with my specialist team this morning, and we talked about how heartbreaking it is to feel like you're not doing enough. And so we do more and we do more. And eventually that is causing a major strain on our mental health, I think, as educators, because we're trying to do everything for everybody else, right? And it's like as a parent, you know, you will give and give and give and give to your children, and then eventually you break, and then they go, "What's wrong?" Really? What do you mean, what's wrong? I just spent, you know, this many hours, this many days, this many months giving, and all you have to say for it is that all? Right? And we're doing that to ourselves, I think, as educators. I think that communication is also a very difficult piece right now, because we get a lot of it. We have to process it continuously. And not all of it is giving us consistent messages. And Aaron, pipe in as well if you have other things to say, please. Constant change. Oh, yep. I see you typed it in there, didn't you?
Yeah,
Do you want me to
I suppose the TV station can't hear that. So it's really the constant changes. You just settle into one learning mode, and then you're asked to do something entirely different. I've written 6 different schedules probably this school year, you know, with all of the different direct service students that I'm working with. They don't know when they're supposed to see me half the time, you know? So, you know, I've really had to adapt to make sure that the communication is really, really high. I think communicating with families, Andrea,
Yep.
I mean, it is quadruple what we're used to doing.
Oh, I would say even more, at least as a specialist, because I typically would only really need to communicate if there were some major concerns, or if I had something really special to share, because families get overwhelmed with a lot of communications, and we're that small part. But even from a parent perspective, I can think about all the emails I'm getting from my 2 children and how overwhelming that can be. So it's like finding that balance between communicating enough, but not too much. Would you say?
Yeah.
and the right things. Like, what do we need to communicate at this point? What can wait? But it's that learning curve piece, kind of like what Sebastian was saying. It's, here's all the directions, go. But in the classroom, yeah, we can't, even as adults, you know, if somebody just said, here's how you use Zoom, I want you to lead a meeting with, right, exactly. You can read it, but until you actually do it with somebody, right, and you practice it. And I think that we as educators, didn't have the time to do it in the fall or in the spring last year. It was go to us, it was go to our kids. Here's all this new stuff, figure it out. But B, we didn't have the training, again, due to time, which these things are increasing. But C, we just don't have the time to delve fully into all of the mechanical pieces of online learning to allow full success for students. So here's your directions, but I neglected to tell you, here's how you troubleshoot this website, here's where you need to turn it in, here's how to, you know, properly facilitate a conversation with teenagers, you know, all of those unwritten rules that if you've done it, you know about, are lost on children because they haven't lived it. So I think that those holes are, we're getting better at patching them, but we didn't know what we didn't know when we started this. And we don't know what we don't know as we move through this either.
Well, this sounds so fun. Okay, how would I, as a college instructor, support these issues when teaching a content class?
Well, I actually, that's my other job is I'm an adjunct professor through Bemidji State University, and I teach the music portion of their undergraduate arts courses for elementary classroom teachers. So I think that the honesty, number one, of letting them know this is hard, and teaching the flexibility of thinking, the ability to think outside of your, because we are very concrete, right? We're very concrete and we know what we know. And as soon as you ask me to do something else that I haven't done, we get a little bit nervous, a little bit scared, and maybe we shut down because we don't want to delve into something new. So teaching our college level students that flexibility to think and to not be afraid to try and make mistakes, or try and make mistakes. Does that make sense? Don't try to make mistakes, but have the flexibility to try, comma, and make those mistakes, comma, and learn from them, because we have to be flexible thinkers. I mean, Erin, you've been in the district 20 years. This is my 21st year, and no year has been the same. I haven't been able to rest on my laurels ever. I have to be able to grow and change and reflect constantly. But I would also, on the flip side, say that you have to know how to balance, because that balance is what's going to get us through the long game. And I think college students, they come in very bright-eyed, right? We're all bright-eyed. I'm going to change the world, and this is what my class will be like, and this is what my students will be like, and they will all love me, and we'll sing songs together, and you know, and then you get into the world and you go, nobody told me it was going to be like this. So the honesty of it, but the ability to work with what you are given and be flexible, because that's what we all have to do right now.
So true. That is true. What have you learned from distance learning, and what new tools that have you discovered that you'd like to continue when the pandemic protocols end?
Is that one for me or for Erin or for Sebastian?
Well, I think it could be for any one of you. If any one of you, Sebastian, do you have anything to say?
Great if you hear from him.
Oh,
Yeah.
Let's see.
Might need to repeat the whole question.
Yeah, it was about
What
tools.
have I know you zoned out, didn't you? So what have you learned from distance learning, and what new tools have you discovered that should be continued when pandemic protocols end?
Okay. Well, it's a hard one. I feel like all the stuff that I've had to do has been stuff that I've just been forced to do to encompass the school, the way school used to be, but in a distance learning format. And I feel like I'm not really going to be able to use a lot of this stuff once school goes back. like everything I had to learn about the technology we're using and all that, like even I had to learn new stuff, and I'm a hip 16-year-old, you know, I should know this, which I didn't. And going back into regular school, I don't think we're ever going to actually use this stuff. This seems like kind of a one-time thing.
What about later in life?
Now, that would maybe, like, especially with knowing Google Meet and all that stuff, that is helpful with getting, you know, meeting with other people across long distances and all that. And, you know, it's nice to have that kind of stuff. But at the same time, especially with my personal education, I don't feel a lot of these are going to be stuff that I will actually really need. And that is something that I feel is not very good. I've spent so much time learning this stuff that will not affect my life later on in a good way. I feel it.
See, and that's interesting because as a parent, I feel like I could think of so many things that I think that he's learned from this that I'd hope that would affect him. So it's just same room, same biology, and very different viewpoints about, you know, what is the takeaway of this situation, which is an interesting concept to think about too.
I think
for our students.
Part of the takeaway for me is resilience, that we've been able to accomplish quite a bit more than I think we initially thought. And that when we have to do things differently, different kinds of problems or inequities are uncovered. So I think we talk about things differently than we ever have before. Who are we not reaching and why? So really have gotten back to the core things that kids need to learn, and a lot of the fluff, so to speak, maybe has been kind of set aside for a while.
I would agree with that first assessment, Aaron, about, you know, seeing the gross inequities and the disparities among our students based solely on a change in format of education, because there are so many more holes that we have to address as educators, but not only as educators, as a societal group. Because there are, you've all acknowledged that there's only so much that one group can do. There's only so much that teachers can do, you know, based on funding and resources and human power and, you know, the training that we have. But it's going to take more than that to get at these issues. And I know somebody had written a question about, you know, what is the district doing to provide technology and to, you know, level the playing field on that. And I feel like our district, and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we've done a really good job of getting tools in everybody's hands. Everybody who needed a computer was able to get a computer. Everybody who needed a hotspot could get a hotspot. But that doesn't mean that all of it will work the same way for somebody who has great service based on where they live and somebody who is couch surfing because they have lost their apartment or they don't have a safe place to set up. So while the tools are there, the ability to use them is still very diverse.
It's the giving the same thing to everyone and expecting everyone to be equal. It doesn't work that way.
Ooh, that was deep.
Well said.
Well said.
Thank you.
It's true though.
How do schools deal with other situations that produce a lot of anxiety, like the George Floyd, the protests, the events at the Capitol on Wednesday? So how does the school address those issues that cause kids a fair amount of anxiety?
Well, from the teacher perspective, at an elementary school, which is going to be very different, I think, for a secondary situation, we as educators get common talking points. And, you know, the district is really good at saying, here are some resources, here are talking points. If you have students who need this, families who need this, you know, let's find a way to do that. But otherwise, because there are these big topics, and Aaron, you had written, you know, sharing the news with kids, that we need to be really careful about what we share. We're really not asked to share and engage in conversations at the elementary level. It's a little bit more difficult of a concept to say, hey, did you hear about what happened with George Floyd? Let's talk about it, kindergarten. And this is why we don't play whatever that video game was that Aaron just said. I mean, it's really difficult because it's not developmentally appropriate, and it's not always our place, I think, as educators at that level to bring it up. But have you guys talked about?
We actually did something about this. So this was back in my first trimester. I was in an acting class, and we took one full day where we got into little breakout rooms in our Google Meets, and it was just students. Like, our teacher, he wasn't in it or anything. It was just us students, and we just had like this heart-to-heart discussion over the entire hour on how the George Floyd thing affected all of us and how we felt about it, and we got to share our opinions and our feelings and all that stuff. And it was actually a really, really nice way to just talk it out. Like, no one was like judging anyone else, and we didn't have any teachers trying to like say a certain thing. We all just got to put our own opinions out there, our own viewpoints. And it was a really nice thing, and I'm glad we did it.
Aaron?
I think, as Andrea was saying, it depends on the level, and it also depends on the kid, of course. I can have that answer about every question, right? But I think it is about the appropriateness of the conversation. Our place in that conversation depends greatly. If it's the George Floyd murder, we definitely have support staff that are trained to have those discussions with particular kids who have particular questions, right? And sometimes it can take a long time to have that conversation. And I think, for Andrea, who's in front of 25 kids or 30 kids, that, maybe that would be very hard to have that conversation and make that space. So, the social workers a lot of times, or the school counselors or psychologists, are often faced with that.
But one beautiful thing about elementary is that you can deal with the underlying emotion piece, especially through the arts of, have you ever felt sad about something? What do you do when you feel sad? How can we work together through sadness? And we often will do that. I mean, that's one of the branches of our art standards, is responding and connecting with these different art forms. So luckily that's kind of built into what I do, and having a real life connection is nice, and doing it developmentally at that level is a nice way for these kids to start processing, because they might not know why they're upset, but maybe their parents were watching the news in the morning. And I mean, children are empaths. They take what we give them every day. If mom and dad or grandma or whoever it is upset, that kid's going to take that on, and they're going to take it on the bus, and they're going to snap at their friend on the bus, and they're going to get off the bus, and they're going to, give the teacher a scowl, and they won't really know why. Right? So we can help them deal with some of those underlying emotional pieces, and then just giving them the tools to talk about it, and the ability to do it and say, yeah, that's okay to feel sad. I feel sad too. And let's work through it. So
I agree with Andrea. The goal is getting at the underlying emotions and making sure that the process is productive for the child. And a lot of times it will require a phone call home afterwards too.
It's getting a little bit late. This is a long meeting for us. And we have a really big group that's attending here tonight. So just know how invested we all are in finding out what's going on. I'm going to ask just a couple more questions that are here, and then we'll call it a night. One question, Andrea, is for you, is how do you as a specialist present your subject matter in a distance learning environment?
So we had the choice of format, either through Google Classroom, which the district has Google accounts, so all the students have Google accounts, or through Seesaw, which is another platform that the district also has accounts for. And so as a specialist, actually as a whole specialist team in our building, we decided to use Google Classroom as our main hub. So every Monday, or if there's no school Monday, every Tuesday, we roll out whatever our curriculum is. And the majority of it is done through videos. We do not teach synchronously, so we don't have meets where the students are all logged in at the same time, because we know that not all students are available based on if they're at daycare, they're at grandma's house, they don't have access during certain times of the day. Parents are sleeping because they work third shift, whatever it is. So they are asynchronous lessons beginning of the week, then they have the entire week to complete all of their specialist areas. We use different, technological formats. Like I said, Seesaw is a great one for recording videos and then having the students be able to respond with videos or any kind of work. And that is what we really try to do as specialists, is get them to show some kind of proof of what they're doing. As a music teacher, if I can't hear you sing or see you clap or hear you clap your rhythms or have you composed or have you talk about whatever it was that we were listening to, I can't get an accurate idea as to whether you are meeting the goals that I need you to meet. So that piece of it is interactive. And then we give feedback interactively as well, either through videos or audio feedback, or if they're older kids, typewritten feedback. So that is across the board for the district, for the specialist classes, that we roll it out asynchronously every week for our distance learners.
Okay, thank you. So then how are you educating children on identifying mental health symptoms for themselves and their friends, and how and when to ask for help? That's a good question.
This is the task of a system over 13 years. So it's not something that you just come out one day and are able to do. So I would say that it starts generally in kindergarten with our social workers getting to every classroom and doing second step, instruction, character education kinds of things, getting them to get used to talking about emotions, and expressing in a positive manner. We've been working in many schools on social emotional learning curriculum, and that's about to be adopted, I'm assuming, next school year, maybe the year after, and to make sure that we have learning in place that's specific to the issue. And it's only been in pilot mode for the last couple of years, and a lot of people have been pushing to change that. But when it comes to a specific child, I think a lot of times we're in trouble. A lot of times we don't do this instruction until we're in trouble, and that's and that's too late a lot of times. It's hard. So I think the social workers end up doing a lot of this catch-up work with kids about how to go back and what's your emotional vocabulary, right? How do you say it? I want to kill myself. So you're sad, you're angry, right? Because kids act out when they can't say it. And I think we all know that. And, that's something that's usually also, taught in the home before they even start kindergarten, right? So we get past tantrums and we move into sharing with words. So that's a huge, huge question. I think that our response is that the schools have been wholly inadequate in teaching character education, and I'm working really hard to change that. I think these focus rooms or these de-escalation rooms are a really wonderful step forward in that direction. So when a kid is struggling, then they have they have a way to talk it out and turn around and get back to being an engaged member of the class.
So there's a next question, I'm just going to answer it, that there are situations where teachers identify children as being abused, and is there concern that we are missing out on identifying kids? Yes, there is definitely that concern that kids are not being identified, kids maybe not being fed. There are circumstances when you don't see children, you can't know what's going on. And that is a big concern. And it extends that issue that Aaron addressed earlier about the multipliers of the characteristics that he talked about that will multiply and extend the length of the experience of those problems. So So Aaron talked about not fretting about kids catching up. So how can we help kids not feel like they're part of a lost generation? Well, we've all lost a lot this year. I mean, we've lost relationship contact with our grandchildren, with our kids, with, you know, and so we all have to help each other with that, I think. Aaron, do you have anything to add?
I think you answered it very, very well, that we're experiencing a shared trauma. And it's something that we all can actually support each other with, because we all understand that, you know, that we're all dealing with a different aspect or aspects of the same thing. And I think that many of us can point to other things in the past where we have somebody to share that experience with. I listened to CNN yesterday, and they were talking about 2 World War II veterans, and one gentleman who's 96 was dying, as many do at that age, and his last wish was that he got to talk with another man who went through the Battle of Guadalcanal with him. And so there was another man who was about 92, 93 years old who came, walked in on his own, and they had a great conversation together. And it got to be recorded for CNN. I don't remember what the name of it was, but I just thought that was fantastic. We just need somebody to share it with, right? And so try to be that person for as many people as you can.
And I would also say we kind of have an invisible yardstick. Things have to change at the legislative level. If we want to see changes in education, like we need to have a huge paradigm shift as to what school is and what education is and what we expect out of our 21st century learners. And what do we want them to have at the end of this, 13 years in our public education system? Because school is one of those areas that has remained somewhat archaic. We have desks, we have rows, we're branching out, but there definitely has to be some change higher up in order to make change lower down, if you understand what that means. Because
so the duty of all of us is to understand what policy need to occur and funding needs to occur, and then support that effort for school districts in Minnesota, particularly Minnesota, since that's where we live. But that's great. I just cannot thank all of you enough. And Amanda is also here, or she was here. I don't know if she's still here, but she's here. Thank you so much for presenting tonight and for giving us your time. If we were in a person-to-person thing, we would give you a League of Women Voters mug, but we're not. So you're out of luck. I don't know where those mugs are stashed.
Wait, we know where Gretchen lives, so.
Well, I do know where Gretchen lives, so she has them. So, but anyway, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. It was very good, and we learned a lot. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate you taking interest in what's going on in our school system and with our families and our students. So thank you for inviting us here. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
We have a lot riding on your success, all of our future Social Security. So next month, we're talking about mental health for the elderly during the pandemic. So we're going to hit all ends of the continuum. Thank you very, very much.